Welcome back to another tutorial. Today, I'm going to show you how I created those beautiful Star Trails time-lapse videos. And this is a really fun way to do astrophotography because you don't need any fancy camera gear, really just a camera, lens, and a tripod. And you don't need to get out to the darkest skies in the world or have a completely clear, moonless night either. So for that reason, Star Trails can be a lot of fun and an easy way to get some cool photos. Before we get started, I should mention that I have a full Star Trails course available over on howtube.com. It currently has over 30 videos that'll walk you through the entire process, and we even have different workflows depending on if the moon is out or if it's a completely new moon. We'll also talk about some different workflows you can use for the best results and more. So I'd recommend you check out my Star Trails course if you enjoyed today's video. In today's video, we're going to go through and process some images I took in Boulder, Colorado back in probably 2016. And this is the workflow you're going to want to follow because it keeps things simple. We'll start off here in Adobe Bridge, navigate to our directory with all of our RAW photos, select them all with Control or Command A, and then right click on any one of the thumbnails and open in Camera RAW. When you've got all your images loaded up here, I recommend you just scroll through them very quickly and make sure that they all look roughly the same. Maybe you switched camera settings halfway through or composition changed. Now's just a good time to make sure that everything does look pretty much the same. In my case it does, so I normally like to pick a photo somewhere in the middle because it's possible that from your first to your last photo things have changed, so somewhere in the middle is a good idea. Then we'll begin with our basic processing. My first problem is that there is a pretty noticeable vignette in the corners and it's kind of distracting. So what I can do is go down to the Optics tab over on the right, and then there's an option to use Profile Corrections. And hopefully it will automatically fix all of your problems. However, I have to caution you very strongly right now that if you leave Distortion Correction set to 100, you will encounter artifacts later on. It almost looks like if you're trying to record your TV screen with your phone, it gets really weird looking. That'll happen here as well. So make sure that you always put the Distortion Correction to 0 when you're doing astrophotography. As for the vignette, you can leave that at 100, or you can even lower it if you want just a slight vignette. That's up to you. I would rather do that manually though, later on in the workflow. If for some reason your lens is not available here on the list, if it doesn't automatically populate, then just click where it says Make, and then find the brand that you were using, and it should be able to figure out the rest. Anyway, that's our first major problem dealt with. We got rid of the vignette. Now I can focus on things like the white balance, the exposure, and more. One of the things that I've realized over the years is that if I get my single RAW photo looking really nice here, it doesn't actually create the best Star Trails photo because things are almost too bright. And for that reason, it's sometimes better to slightly underexpose your photos when you're doing your basic processing. And this just comes with practice. So what I'm going to do in this case is lower the highlights. I'm also going to lower the whites a little bit, and maybe even the exposure, because I don't want those stars getting too bright. That's my main concern. I could bring up the shadows to have a bit more detail here, and add a little bit more contrast. In fact, if I had a lot of contrast, we can almost see that the left-hand side of the image is a bit brighter than the right. It's probably not going to be a big deal, but still, maybe I should go down to my Optics tab and lower the vignetting amount from 100 to maybe 75. Now it's not as noticeable that that corner is brighter. And these are the kind of things you just want to mess around with to see what you can do. Then if that looks better, we'll go back to the Basic tab and continue with our edits. Another tip is that if your color balance looks a little bit weird, start by increasing your saturation all the way and then go up to your temperature and tint, and then it'll make it easier to fine tune the colors because everything's really extreme looking. If you're not sure, you can always try setting this to auto. That looks a little bit too light bluted, so I'll probably go back to as shot and then tweak it manually. Then I'll go back and lower the saturation to something more reasonable, maybe 30. Okay, if we compare that to my raw data, that looks a lot better, almost a night and day difference. Before we move on, I should scroll down to the Detail tab and then lower the sharpening amount from 40 to 0. Because that's just going to add problems and even make the image look a bit grainier than it should. If I look at my camera settings, these shots were only 10 seconds long, and in 10 seconds you're never going to get quite enough light for a clean photo. Therefore, I might as well increase the noise reduction to maybe 10 or 15 to smooth out the image. I wouldn't want to go much higher though, because then you're going to lose detail. especially in your foreground. But I think a value of around 12 will be good today. Alright, that should be enough for our basic edits here to start. So I'll go over to the left, click on my thumbnail, then hit Controller Command A to select the rest of my thumbnails. Finally, I'll click this button right here to sync the settings with all the other photos. When you get the pop-up window, just hit OK. And there we go. Now all of our photos have the exact same edits applied. I'd recommend you go through again though, and just make sure that the edits look good from the first to the last photo because, as we discussed, things might have changed. In this example, I don't have a problem with any of those, so I think we're just about done with step 1. As you can see here, I found a photo with a plane going through it, and I realized that there are options to fix that here in Camera RAW. For example, the spot removal little band-aid. You can try this if you want, and just click and drag over the problem. But what you might find is that the Camera RAW version does not do a good job, and usually that's the case. Therefore, we're not going to worry about the planes right now. We'll save that for the later part of the workflow. Provided you're happy with the basic edits though, we'll hit Controller Command A again to select all of our thumbnails, and then we'll right-click, Save Images, Save Images. Because we're going to be stacking together hundreds of photos, our best bet is to change this to JPEG. I realize this will induce some quality loss, but unless you've got hundreds of gigs of free space on your computer, and a really powerful computer at that, you just got to go with JPEGs, that's the way it is. Another thing you might want to do is change the document name to a 3-digit serial number to stay organized, and then just verify that it is beginning at 001. For the quality, you can do whatever you want here. I normally do a quality of 9, which gives a high quality image, but without the ridiculous file size. That's up to you though, which option you want to go with. I would say 9, but you could probably push it to 10 if you want to. Finally, we need to save these in a folder where we can find them. I'll go into my Boulder folder and then create a new folder called JPEG. There we go, and now we're going to save all of our photos in there. The only other thing to talk about here is the color space. I strongly recommend that most people stick to sRGB throughout their entire workflow, unless you know what you're doing. Because if you don't really understand what sRGB is or Adobe, you can really screw yourself over at the end of the workflow if you're not careful. So by using sRGB all the way through, that'll prevent any weird color problems from showing up when you post these online. But if you know what you're doing, of course you can use whatever color space you want. Anyway, that all looks good. I'll click on save and then meet with you guys again when this is complete. Now that my photos have finished saving, I'll click done in the lower right. The next logical step in this workflow would be to head to Photoshop, remove the planes and any other problems, and then finally create the video. However, there's a chance that the edits we did aren't going to look that great, and there would be nothing worse than spending an hour or two going through all of our photos only to realize that the final video doesn't even look that good. Therefore, what I recommend you do is start off by creating your video. And even if there's plane trails and everything else, that's okay. We just want to make sure that the white balance and everything else looks as we wanted it to. So for this next part, we are going to be using a free program called StarStaX, and you can get this on both Mac and Windows, I believe. Alternatively, you can use Sequitur if you want to go that route. Either way though, it's going to be the same general process. We'll navigate to our newly created JPEG folder, select all of the JPEGs, and in fact, you don't necessarily need to do all of them right now, but you might as well. And then once you've loaded in your photos, make sure the blending mode is set to lighten, and that's really good enough for right now. So everything else should be set automatically. If it's set to use compression, turn that off because that could cause some artifacts. And I think that'll work for us today. In the upper left corner, we have a little button that says Start Processing, and when we click on that, it's going to go through and automatically create our Star Trails image. And even within the first 10 photos, you can see that we've got a lot of issues going on in terms of the planes. All things considered though, this is already looking pretty good to me. I'm not seeing any weird problems just yet, so I think we're in good shape. But you might find that your stars are really bright and it just doesn't look very good. And that's exactly what I want you to see, is figure out whatever problems you have now before you spend all that time trying to move the planes. Now that I've pretty much verified that the final image will probably look fine, I can stop the processing, close out of StarStaX, and then we'll head over to Photoshop and remove any blemishes that we see. When you get inside of Photoshop, go up to File, Open, navigate to your directory where you have all the JPEGs. And I'd recommend you do this in small chunks, because if you try to do all 400 images at once, you're probably going to crash Photoshop or your computer. I would rather open up maybe 20 images at one time, and then go through them, remove the planes, then do the next 20, and so on. As you can imagine, this can take quite a while. Before we go any further, I want to stress that the reason we're going through here frame by frame is because we are creating a Star Trails video. If you're just trying to create a Star Trails image, then this would be a waste of time, because there's a much faster way to do things, and I explain that in my Star Trails course over on HowTo. So I'd recommend you check that out again if you still want to learn more. For this particular image, number 20, I don't see any problems. I'll close out of it. Number 19 looks fine. 18, 17, 16, 15, 14. Number 12, I notice what looks to be a satellite. And if that's the case, I'll click on my spot healing brush tool over on the left. Then with a pretty small brush here, I'll click once at one end of the trail. Then I'll hold down the Shift key and click once at the other end, and it automatically removes the problem. Then I can hit Control or Command S to save the image. I'll do quality of 9 again. And that's our first little problem removed. We can close out of it. Here we have another one. Click once, hold down Shift, click again. That problem is fixed, hit Control S. And we're going to go through here and do this for every single frame. And you might decide this is not worth all the hassle, and you're fine with the planes going through. That's totally fine. You can just skip ahead in the video to where we finally put all this together. But if you're like me, you find the planes very distracting, and you just want people to focus on the natural stars and nothing else. So if you're like that, then you'll want to go through and do this, obviously, especially for these really large plane trails. But with the help of the spot healing brush and just clicking once, holding down the Shift key, clicking again, that will solve the problem. One other thing I should mention is that you have to be a little bit careful, because it's possible there will be artifacts, and also we are creating, of course, a Star Trails image. And where I'm going with that is if you start removing stars, then you're going to get gaps in your final Star Trails. So if I go through here and accidentally get rid of that one, then I'm going to have a gap for the rest of my sequence. So you do want to be careful when you're doing this and make sure that you're not removing too many stars that might be along the flight path, if at all possible. Although I realize that can be kind of hard to do. If the spot healing brush tool isn't working as well as you'd hoped, you can always try changing from content aware to proximity match. There's a chance that will work better, or it could actually look quite a bit worse. So you got to mess around with this and see what works best for you. The worst case scenario is that the spot healing brush tool just isn't working the way you want it to. And because we are going to be using the lighten blend mode to create our star trails, there's another option you can do. You can just grab a black paintbrush, make it a little bit larger than the plane trail itself. And with your black paintbrush, you'll click once at the one end of it, hold down the Shift key, click once at the other end. And I realize that doesn't look very good, but because we are using the lighten blend mode, the problem will not really be visible in the final video. So that is an option you can try again if you are going to be having issues with the spot healing brush, but obviously that would be the better way to do things, is to grab your spot healing brush and just fix it manually, like so. Okay, so you get the drill. You're going to go through here frame by frame until all the problems are removed, and then at that point we'll reconvene and finish up with the workflow. I just want to make sure I'm as thorough as possible in this video. So I've gone through and I've completed the first 20 images. I'll go back up to File, Open. And if I did 1 through 20, and that's nice that I did the 3-digit serial number because that makes it much easier to keep track. Now I can do 21 through 40. I'll open those up, go through, do the same thing. And then again, we'll meet back up once all of the problems have been removed, if that's something you want to do. I'm all done removing the planes from my images. Now I'm back here in StarStaX, and this is where we're going to finish up the workflow. So assuming you've got all your images ready to go, we'll click on the Open Files button in the top left corner, navigate to our JPEG folder, select all of our JPEGs, and then hit Open. Next, we need to click the Save After Each Step button over on the right. This is critical for our workflow because this is what's going to allow us to create the actual video. After you've clicked on Save After Each Step, you need to save these in a new folder which we'll specify right here. So I want you to click on Browse. We're going to back out of the JPEG folder, create a new folder called StarStaX, or whatever you want to, and then we'll place these photos in that new folder, just so we stay organized. The only other thing to make sure is that you are using the lighten blend mode, because if you had to paint anything out with a black paintbrush, this will prevent it from showing up in the final image. Alright, assuming you've chosen lighten blend mode, you've specified the new folder, you are saving after each step, and you've got all your photos loaded in, we'll click on the Begin Processing button in the left-hand corner. This would be a good time to talk about how many photos you actually need for this to work. And if you think about it, if we do a 24 frames per second video, which is kind of the standard, that means we need 24 photos for every second's worth of video. So if I have 240 images, I'll have a 10-second long time-lapse video. That's pretty good. But today I've got almost 400 images, so you can do the math yourself. And I always say the more photos the better, especially for star trails, because you can really just set things up at the start of the night, even go to bed and then wake up in the morning and all that data is captured. When my processing here in StarStaX is complete, we're going to meet back in Photoshop for the final part of our workflow, where we take these photos and actually turn it into a final video. As my images are processing, I noticed a problem that I should have caught earlier, but I didn't. So I'm going to stop the stack right now because this lit up grass is going to be very distracting for my video. Unfortunately, what this means is that I have to go back to the original JPEGs, figure out what frames had the lights in them, and then take care of that problem. Again, that's why we did this immediately after Camera RAW in the workflow, because I didn't want this to happen to you. But in the interest of making the video, I kind of cut it short and I shot myself in the foot. So what I need to do, again, is go back to Photoshop, figure out what frame, and it might just be a single frame that has the lights. But once I figure that out, I'll use a black paintbrush to paint them out and then run through StarStaX again. As you can imagine, this takes quite a while, but I think the final result is worth all the trouble. So the fastest way to figure out our problem photo is probably just to go to the JPEGs, and then I think it happened around image 100. I'm just going to use my arrow keys to go through here frame by frame until I see a photo with some lit up grass. It's kind of hard to see, but in image 192, the grass is definitely lit up there at the bottom. So I'll make a note of that, and I'll keep looking for any others. There we go. Frame 202 and 203 are the culprits mainly. Now that I have, oh look, 205 as well, 206, that was probably me walking out in the field with my headlamp to check how my camera is working. So now that I found the cluster of images I need to focus on, I'll head back to Photoshop and take care of it. The way this is going to work is we'll go to File, Open. I know 192, I believe, was the first image with the problem. Then I'll find the grass at the bottom of the frame, grab a black paintbrush, and because we are using the lighten blend mode, I can just grab a black paintbrush and paint over where I don't want it to be included, like so. Then I'll hit Control Command S, I'll go back to File, Open, and then I'll grab the other photos. Same thing here. We've got the light lighting up the grass. I just grab a black paintbrush, paint over it as well as I can, with the understanding that the black paintbrush essentially removes it from the final image. Then I'll hit Control Command S again, and just repeat this as many times as you need to, verifying that once this is all gone, we can move on. Alternatively, you can also use the spot healing brush. I should have probably mentioned this earlier. Sometimes though, the spot healing brush tool will not work as you would expect, so that's why I did show you the black paintbrush tool first. And again, once I'm all done with my edits here, using either the spot healing brush or the black paintbrush, we'll meet back up again in StarStaX, run through it again. In fact, I'll probably just cut that out because you already saw what to do. So when I'm done with this, we'll actually be in Photoshop for the final process of putting this all together. The final step on our workflow is to go back to Photoshop, go up to File, Open. After you've clicked on Open, navigate to your StarStaX folder, and this is very important. You just need to click on the very first photo, and then click on the button that says Image Sequence right here. That's it. You don't want to go through and select all your photos because if you do that, Photoshop will try to open up every single image independently. As long as you click on the first image, check the box for image sequence, you're all set. Then we'll click on Open. This brings up the frame rate option, and you can choose whatever you want, but I'd recommend doing 24. That usually works best. Then we'll hit OK. And right now we can't actually see our timeline, so let's go up to Window and choose Timeline. With our timeline visible, we can scrub through the video here and make sure it looks good. I normally like to go about 3/4 of the way through and then start adding some adjustments to the video. For example, if I want to add a selective color layer, I can do that right here by clicking on Selective Color, and now this will apply to the entire video. So if I want to go to maybe the blue color channel and make the blues a little bit more saturated, I can do that very easily. Then I can go to the cyan channel, maybe alter those as well. I can even do yellows and reds to get the flat irons here looking a bit better. Let's do a before and after for the selective color layer. You can see how we made the image a bit more saturated. And I can do the same thing with any of the adjustments you see here, whether that's a levels, a curves, a vibrance, or even a color lookup table. I'd recommend you come through here and experiment to see just how far you can push the final image, or in this case, the final video. For example, I can add a curves layer, click on the hand tool, and then add just a little bit of contrast. If you're not a fan of doing that, you can always just click and add a point manually, bring down the shadows, add another point up top, add some contrast, just like so. And when I do that, I realize I missed another plane, which is unfortunate. So that means I can either go through the original JPEG photos and remove the plane again and restack it again, or I could go through the StarStaX image and remove it, but that would probably be a lot more work at the end of the day. So this is why I tried to stress, make sure you take your time, go through all the photos at the very start of the workflow, and fix any problems that we don't have to keep re-rendering everything because you missed one small thing. Let me show you another trick that you can use. For example, down here at the bottom of the screen, we had what appears to be a red headlamp, probably mine, illuminating the grass, and I didn't catch that either. So if I had a new selective color layer targeting the reds, I can maneuver these so that way that problem kind of disappears. As best as I can anyway. And I don't care what this does to the rest of the image, I'm just looking down here. When I've got the selective color the best I can even go through and add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. With the hue and saturation, you can choose from the various color channels, in this case red. Then you can lower the saturation of that color channel to make the reds less obvious, or you can adjust the hue, whatever you want to do. I'd also recommend probably lowering the lightness as well. And I think those two adjustments look a lot better here at the bottom of the frame. The issue is I only want them to affect the bottom of the frame. So I'm going to hit Controller Command I to invert the layer mask. That effectively turns it off. Then I take a white paintbrush and I just paint in where I want those changes to apply, right here at the bottom. If that looks good, I'll hold down the Alt or Option key, click and drag my layer mask down to the selective color layer as well. That way these changes are only targeting the bottom of the frame, just like I wanted. From here, I'll take one more look at the image, I'll scrub through it again, and see if there's any final changes I want to apply. Another thing I should mention is that when we're doing these final touches to the video, you can only use the adjustments. If you try to go through and add a filter, whether that's a Camera RAW filter or a Topaz Labs, whatever it might be, these filters will not work. They will only apply to a single frame of the entire video, which is basically useless. So just make sure if you are doing some adjustments, you're only using the options right here in the Adjustment tab. I'm pretty happy with what we have here though. So now that we're ready to go, I'll go up to File, Export, Render Video. And this is how we're actually going to create our final video file. Again, that's File, Export, Render Video. And as I'm sitting here looking at the settings, I remembered another important thing. Most of us are using 16:9 displays, and most of our cameras are not shooting in that dimension. Therefore, if I try to render this video as is, it will probably have black bars on the side. Therefore, I might want to crop in the video before I actually render it. If I click on the crop tool, I'll change it to 16:9. That way I have control of how the crop will appear. And I did leave a lot of extra sky there, so it's no big deal if I crop that out. The alternative again would be that you'd have black bars on the side, but you'd have the full composition if you don't crop to 16:9. That looks better though. Now we'll go back to File, Export, Render Video. This time I will use probably a preset for 4K, or in this case we'll do 3840 by 2160. That is 4K, 24 frames per second. Make sure you rename the video and then save it in a folder where you can find it. And that's going to do it for today's video. If you want to learn even more about star trails, you can check out my course over on howtube.com, which has over 30 videos that will walk you through the entire process.